All right. Hey, class, how's it going? So, welcome to Unit 10, Intro to Humanities, Part 2. Um, for this particular lecture, this unit, we're going to be spending some time talking about some of the developments that are happening in what will be referred to as the American Modern Movement or taking a look at American modernism. And so this is a fascinating period, one of my most favorite artistic periods in American literature. Being a literature teacher, it's kind of my go-to. So American modernism is going to reflect a lot of the key ideas that we talked about and we discussed regarding European modernism, but there's going to be some shifts, there's going to be some differences, anywhere you take this philosophical tendency of an era and you plop it in a new geography and with a new set of people with slightly different underlying philosophies, you're going to see differences and adaptations and changes. So, what we have going on in this period is that we have what's known as the Jazz Age. We also have, which is going to be a term for those of you who know F. Scott Fitzgerald, the author of The Great Gatsby. He will label this period the Jazz Age, but we also have the Harlem Renaissance occurring, which is going to be an artistic movement in Harlem, centering on African American art and music and literature. And then we also have this other underlying, and I put skyscrapers here, and I've already brought this up in previous lectures, but massive technological developments. So, technological, but not just technological, but industrial. Industrial developments that are changing the face of this era. So, let's go ahead and jump in and take a look at some of these. So, the Harlem Renaissance. The Harlem Renaissance is going to be a major cultural movement occurring in Harlem, right outside of Manhattan. And what's going to end up happening, we're driving this, is that a lot of African Americans are going to be moving from the South into these northern cities for some of these job opportunities that are occurring and to escape some of the racial oppression that's still quite rampant in the South in the early 1900s. And so by the end of World War One in the 1920s, World War One comes to a conclusion, the Spanish flu comes to a conclusion, and people are ready for something different. Remember, we had already mentioned that this entire generation was called the Lost Generation, and it wasn't. It was because there was the experiences of World War One culturally, and even for people who weren't there, but who were obviously dramatically impacted, was that there was this recentering and reexamination of what does it mean to be moral? What are our morals at this point in time? And this is something that Europeans were struggling with, and Americans were too, and they were changing. And so as all these black folks end up in Harlem, we have this huge upsurge of artistic expression and artistic adoption. A lot of this will be led through music, through jazz and blues, jazz artists and blues artists who are performing for the first time for all white audiences. Well, not for the first time for all white audiences, but they will be in clubs where traditionally black musicians would not have been accepted. But now you're starting to see uh, folks going to Harlem to see the music from these black artists, and this is a real movement in American society, and it's going to lead to this interest in this love of jazz and blues, for those of you who know your music history, is going to lead to the rock and roll that we see in the 1940s and 50s. This is going to start that progression. So a lot of changes are occurring. We're going to see this, with Louis Armstrong and um, a whole host of musical artists that we'll study in this unit. All right, so let's talk about American modernism in general. The Harlem Renaissance is one example of that artistic bent that people are moving towards. But there's also something else that's going on. It's this constant tension. You can often gather a era's key philosophies based on the inherent tensions that are occurring in the society at that time period. And right now, as I've already mentioned, we have this industrialization where we have mass reproduction of music for the first time. We have the mass distribution through radio and through records, mass distribution of music. And then we have these massive skyscrapers being built. And so these changes are causing inherent tensions because if you think about up until till the advent of radio, if you were to listen to music, by and large it would be live music. You would go, you would sit down, and you would listen to people perform. And now all of a sudden music is portable, it's shot out over the airwaves, it's anywhere you end up. And so a lot of people, a lot of artists are going to start looking for this authenticity in their music. And so when we see that authenticity, for those of you who know about both jazz and blues, both incorporate these large aspects of improvisation where you make it up as you go. And there's that conversation, the call and response that we'll be looking at in the text is all going to be part of this raw naturalness that can't exactly be reproduced. Yes, you can record it, but the next night, the next gig, it's going to be completely unique and completely new. And so I think some of this improvisation is really a challenge to this mass production, mass distribution. You're also going to see this inherent drive towards kind of rugged authenticity, and you're going to see this in poets like Claude McKay, who is going to be very much challenging concepts and issues of race in a very direct way, a very authentic way. They'll be quite challenging to some people of that era, but also honest and raw. So if we step back to the modern movement, modernity and modernism is questioning what happened to the individual. Where did the individual go? What's the role of the individual in this, this mass production, mass death, mass, as far as World War I goes? And all of a sudden, where is the authenticity? And let's slow down and let's try to capture a particular moment in time. Improvisation. Let's really focus on a sense of place, something that happens in a particular place at a particular time. Again, the Harlem Renaissance is not the only artistic event like this, but by far one of the largest in this period that really starts to exemplify the sense of place. We also even see this in Frank Lloyd Wright's architecture that you'll be learning about in this unit. Frank Lloyd Wright's architecture right here, this is that kind of large international style, as it's referred to. And if you think about a skyscraper, the skyscrapers, the entire idea of a skyscraper didn't exist until the turn of the century and into the 1920s when they were being built in cities all over. And a skyscraper is very linear, and it's it's a square, and that is it. And every single level is packed full of little cubicles for people to sit in. Frank Lloyd Wright very much rejected that, even though it was a very popular style and growing and part of modernism, there's also this tension where an architect like Frank Lloyd Wright actually rebels against that style. And instead, in terms of a sense of place, he believes that architecture must represent the location or the landscape in which the building is placed. And so for those of you who know Falling Waters, famous building, but he didn't do it just with that one. The sense of place was very important to him. And he also thought, so not just about location, but also about the inhabitants. Who were the inhabitants? Not just what did they need, but who were they? And how could this house be customized, that authenticity, moment in time, sense of place to that particular person or family? And so I just want you to get this sense that American modernism is very much about these kind of opposing tensions. I think a lot of people during this era were very excited about modernity and the cars and the airplanes and the first flights across the Atlantic Ocean and all of these new inventions and products that they were able to buy. And yet there was a great sense of hesitancy towards what did this mean? What's it mean when you're a musical artist who has always been paid because you perform every night, and now all of a sudden your one song is mass produced and played out over the radio waves to anyone who wants to listen? What does that mean? So, obviously history is always, and art and history are always these kind of dynamic tensions, but it's really apparent here. So I want to share with you just kind of a story to understand. I think sometimes in our day and age, it's hard to understand the acceleration of this change that was occurring. And so I'm going to share a story. My stepmother, her grandmother was born in around 1860. And she, when she was a little girl, she was about 5 years old. She was on a wagon train in the Oregon Trail, and her family was moving from the Midwest. They're Midwestern farmers, and they were going out to Oregon. And so she was on the Oregon Trail, and she remembers as one of her early memories, Lincoln, news of Lincoln having been shot. And she then continued to live her life. And, obviously we have the end of the Civil War right here. I'm just going to say CW, Civil War, and Lincoln being shot. And then she lived through World War One. And then, even by the time World War One, she would have been approaching 50 years old. She continued to live through World War II. Oh, yeah, let's not forget the Great Depression here. She lived through the Great Depression. She lived through World War II. She lived through the Cold War. And then she died in the she was well over 100 years old. And I think she died in, like, let's just say 1965. I don't remember the exact year, but she died in this period. And at the end of her life, she flew the same trip that she took in a wagon train. She flew on a jet plane across the United States in the matter of hours. And so this is that rate of change. This is, yeah, she had a long, healthy, life, but this was one life that people potentially could live through these things. And so she saw Lincoln shot and she saw JFK assassinated. Okay. And she saw and remembered both of these events in her life. And I mean, talk about insane bookends between, the Oregon Trail and Lincoln being shot and a jet plane and JFK being shot. This time period, we're looking at this modern period right in here. If we go from there to somewhere, not all the way back to Lincoln being shot, but somewhere in there, it's astounding. And there's more to come. So, yeah. So just pay attention. And I hope you enjoy all of the art and the music and the literature that we're going to look at in Unit 10. Let me know if you have any questions.